Hi, I'm Pam Thompson. I'm going to be reading a short story in honor of Valentine's Day in the 19th century by Anton Chekhov, aptly entitled Love. 3 o'clock in the morning. The soft April night is looking in at my windows and caressingly winking at me with its stars. I can't sleep. I am so happy. My whole being, from head to heels, is bursting with a strange, incomprehensible feeling. I can't analyze it just now. I haven't the time. I'm too lazy. And there, hang analysis. Why is a man likely to interpret his sensations when he is flying headlong foremost from a belfry, or has just learned that he has won 200,000? Is he in a state to do it? This was more or less how I began my love letter to Sasha, a girl of 19 with whom I had fallen in love. I began it 5 times and as often tore up the sheets, scratched out whole pages, and copied it all over again. I spent as long over the letter as if it had been a novel I had to write to order. And it was not because I had tried to make it longer, more elaborate, and more fervent, but because I wanted endlessly to prolong the process of this writing. When one sits in the stillness of one's study and communes with one's own day, dreams while the spring night looks in at one's window. Between the lines, I saw a beloved image, and it seemed to me that there were, sitting at my same writing table with me, spirits as naively happy, as foolish, and as blissfully smiling as I. I wrote continually, looking at my hand, which still ached deliciously where hers had lately pressed it. And if I turned my eyes away, I had a vision of the green trellis of the little gate. Through that trellis, Sasha gazed at me after I had said goodbye to her. When I was saying goodbye to her, I was thinking of nothing and was simply admiring her figure, as every decent man does, admiring a pretty woman, when I saw through the trellis 2 big eyes. I suddenly, as though by inspiration, knew that I was in love, that it was all settled between us and fully decided already, that I had nothing left to do but carry out certain formalities. It is a great delight also when one seals up a love letter and, slowly putting on one's hat and coat, goes softly out of the house and to carry the treasure to the post. There are no stars in the sky now. In their place, there is a long, whitish streak in the east, broken here and there by clouds above the roofs of the dingy houses. From that streak, the whole sky is flooded with pale light. The town is asleep, but already the water carts have come out, and somewhere in faraway factory a whistle sounds to wake up the work people. Besides, the post box, slightly moist with dew, you are sure to see the clumsy figure of a house porter wearing a bell-shaped sheepskin and carrying a stick. He is in a condition akin to catalepsy. He is not asleep or awake, but something in between. If the boxes knew how often people resort to them for the decisions of their fate, they would not have such a humble air. I, anyway, almost kissed my postbox, and as I gazed at it, it reflected that post is the greatest of blessings. I beg anyone who has ever been in love to remember how one usually hurries home after dropping the letter in the box, rapidly gets into bed and pulls up the quilt in the full conviction that as soon as one wakes up in the morning, one will be overwhelmed with memories of the previous day and look with rapture at the window where the daylight will be eagerly making its way through the folds of the curtain. Well, to facts. Next morning at midday, Sasha's maid brought me the following answer. I am delighted to come to us this day. Please, I shall expect you. Your S. Not a single comma. This lack of punctuation and the misspelling of the word delighted, the whole letter, and even the long, narrow envelope in which it was put, filled my heart with tenderness. In the sprawling but diffident handwriting, I recognized Sasha's walk, her way of raising her eyebrows when she laughed, the movement of her lips. But the contents of the letter did not satisfy me. In the first place, poetical letters are not answered in that way. And in the second, why should I go to Sasha's house to wait till it should occur to her stout mamma, her brothers and poor relations, to leave us alone together? It would never enter their heads, and nothing is more hateful than to have to restrain one's rapture simply because of the intrusion of some trumpery in the shape of a half-deaf old woman or a little girl pestering one with questions. I sent an answer by the maid asking Sasha to select some park or boulevard for a rendezvous. My suggestion was readily accepted. I had struck the right chord, as the saying is. Between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I made my way to the furthest and most overgrown part of the park. There was not a soul in the park, and the tryst might have taken place somewhere nearer in one of the avenues or arbors. But women don't like doing it by halves in romantic affairs. In for a penny, in for a pound. If you're in for a tryst, let it be in the furthest and most impenetrable thicket, where no one has a risk of stumbling upon some rough or drunken man. When I went up to Sasha, she was standing with her back to me, and in that back I could read a devilish mystery. It seemed as though that back and the nape of her neck and the black spots on her dress were saying, hush. The girl was wearing a simple cotton dress over which she had thrown a light cape. To add to the air of mysterious secrecy, her face was covered with a white veil. Not to spoil the effect, I had to approach on tiptoe and speak in a half whisper. From what I remember now, I was not so much the essential point of the rendezvous as the detail of it. Sasha was not so much absorbed in the interview itself as in its romantic mysteriousness, my kisses, the silence of the gloomy trees, my vows. There was not a minute in which she forgot herself, was overcome, or let the mysterious expression drop from her face. And really, if there had been any Ivan Sivanovich or Sidor Ivanovich in my place, she would have felt just as happy. How is one to make out in such circumstances whether one is loved or not? Whether the love is the real thing or not? From the park, I took Sasha home with me. The presence of the beloved woman in one's bachelor quarters affects one like wine and music. Usually, one begins to speak of the future with confidence and self-reliance, with which one does so is beyond bounds. You make plans and projects, talk fervently of the rank of general, though you have not reached the rank of lieutenant, and altogether you fire off such high-blown nonsense that your listener must have a great deal of love and ignorance of life to assent to it. Fortunately for men, women in love are always blinded by their feelings and never know anything of life. Far from not assenting, they actually turn pale with holy awe and are full of reverence and hang greedily on the maniac's words. Sasha listened to me with attention, but I soon detected an absent-minded expression on her face. She did not understand me. The future of which I talked interested her only in its external aspect, and I was wasting time in displaying my plans and projects before her. She was keenly interested in knowing which would be her room, what papers she'd have in her room, and why I had an upright piano instead of a grand piano, and so on. She examined carefully all the little things on my table, looked at the photographs, sniffed at the bottles, peeled the old stamps off the envelope, saying she wanted them for something. Please collect old stamps for me, she said, making a grave face. Please do. Then she found a nut in the window, noisily cracked it, and ate it. Why don't you stick little labels on the backs of your books? She asked, taking a look at the bookcase. What for? Oh, so that each book should have a number. And where am I to put my books? I've got books too, you know. What books have you got? I asked. Sasha raised her eyebrows, thought a moment, and said, all sorts. And if it had entered my head to ask her what thoughts and convictions, what aims she had, she would no doubt have raised her eyebrows, thought a minute, and have said in the same way, all sorts. Later I saw Sasha home and left her house regularly, officially engaged, and was so reckoned till our wedding. If the reader would allow me to judge merely from my personal experience, I maintain that to be engaged is very dreary, far more so than to be a husband or nothing at all. An engaged man is neither one thing nor the other. He has left one side of the river and not reached the other. He is not married, and yet he can be said to be a bachelor, but is in something not unlike the condition of the porter I have mentioned above. Every day, as soon as I found a free moment, I hastened to my fiancé. As I went, I usually bore within me a multitude of hopes, desires, intentions, suggestions, phrases. I always fancied that soon as the maid opened the door, I should, from feeling oppressed and stifled, plunge at once up to my neck into a sea of refreshing happiness. But it always turned out otherwise, in fact. Every time I went to see my fiancée, I found her family and other members of the household busy over the silly trousseau. And by the way, they were hard at work sewing for 2 months, and they had less than 100 rubles worth of things. There was a smell of irons, candle grease, fumes, bugles scrunched under one's feet. The 2 most important rooms were piled up with billows of linens, calico, and muslin, and from among the billows peeped out Sasha's little head with a thread between her teeth. All the sewing party welcomed me with cries of delight, but at once led me off to the dining room where I could not hinder them nor see what only husbands are permitted to behold. In spite of my feelings, I had to sit in the dining room and converse with Pimenova, one of the poor relations. Sasha, looking worried and excited, kept running by me with a thimble or skein of wool or some other boring object. Wait, I shan't be a moment, she would say when I raised imploring eyes to her. Only fancy that wretched Stepanida has spoiled the bodice of my beret dress. And after waiting in vain for this grace, I lost my temper, went out of the house, and walked about the streets in the company of my new cane that I had bought. Or I would want to go for a walk or a drive with my fiancée, would go around and find her already standing in the hall with her mother, dressed to go out and playing with her parasol. "Oh, we are going to the arcade," she would say. "We have got to buy some more cashmere and change the hat." My now outing is knocked on the head. I join the ladies and go with them to the arcade. It is revoltingly dull to listen to women shopping, haggling, and trying to outdo the sharp shopman. I felt ashamed when Sasha, after turning over masses of material and knocking down the price to a minimum, walked out of the shop without buying anything, or else told the shopman to cut her some half-ruble worth. When they came out of the shop, Sasha and her mamma, with scared and wounded faces, would discuss at length having made a mistake, having bought the wrong thing, the flowers in the chintz being too dark, and so on. Yes, it is a bore to be engaged. I'm glad it's over. Now I am married. I am sitting in my study, reading. Behind me on the sofa, Sasha is sitting munching something noisily. I want a glass of beer. "Sasha, look for this corkscrew," I say. "It's lying about somewhere." Sasha leaps up, rummages in a disorderly way among 2 or 3 heaps of papers, drops the matches, and without finding the corkscrew, sits down again in silence. 5 minutes passed. 10. I begin to be fretted both by thirst and vexation. "Sasha, do look for the corkscrew," I say. Sasha leaps up again and rummages amongst the papers near me. Her munching and rustling of the papers affects me like the sound of sharpening knives against one another. I get up and begin looking for the corkscrew myself. At last it is found. The beer is uncorked. Sasha remains by the table and begins telling me something at length. "You'd better read something, Sasha," I say. She takes up a book, sits down facing me, and begins moving her lips. I look at her little forehead, moving lips, and sink into thought. She is getting on for 20, I reflect. If one takes a boy of the educated class and of that age and compares them, what a difference. The boy would have knowledge and convictions and some intelligence. But I forgive that difference, just as the low forehead and moving lips are forgiven. I remember in my old Lovelace days, I have cast off women for a stain on their stockings, or for one foolish word, or for not cleaning their teeth. And now I forgive everything. I forgive the munching, the muddling about with the corkscrew, the slovenliness, the long talking about nothing that matters. I forgive it all almost unconsciously, with no effort of will, as though Sasha's mistakes were my mistakes. And many things which would have made me wince in the old days move me to tenderness and even rapture. The explanation of this forgiveness of everything lies in my love for Sasha. But what is the explanation of love itself? I really don't know. The end.